Our next major stop in South Africa is Addo Elephant Park, and at approximately 1,600 square kilometres, Addo is a great deal smaller than Kruger. If you'll forgive me repeating a somewhat tired old mantra, however, size really isn't everything. Addo Elephant Park hosts a truly astonishing diversity of wildlife. Sitting on the edge of the Garden Route in the Western Cape of South Africa, Addo Elephant Park borders on the coast and therefore has a very different climate to Kruger. With something to offer most species year-round, many of the birds are resident, such as the Cape wagtail, blacksmith lapwing and three-banded plover shown here, or indeed the rather gregarious and quite loud Cape canary. Also found in Addo Elephant Park is a bird with which I have a somewhat complicated history, the greater double-collared sunbird. I have something of a love-hate relationship with this bird. They are beautiful and I love looking at them. Indeed, they are probably my spark bird and responsible therefore for my descent into twitching. But several years prior to capturing this footage, I encountered my first one in Cape Town and utterly failed at getting any usable photos or footage of it. This being sub-Saharan Africa, anytime you find waterholes, as one might expect, you also find weavers. Addo Elephant Park is home to at least 12 species of birds within the family Placeidae, the weavers, plus a 13th species which actually is not a weaver at all. And again, the weaver family as a whole is one that I have a little difficulty with. On the one hand, their gregarious and social nature is quite charming, and indeed their engineering skills in producing the nests is nothing short of astonishing. However, the noise they make as they scream and chatter at one another continuously in dozens or even hundreds is little short of deafening. That we were readily able to identify, we spotted at least 3 species of weaver during our time in Addo. The Cape weaver with the reddish-brown feathers around the face, the southern masked weaver with its deep black face and bib, technical term that, and last but most certainly not least, the red bishop. At our preferred birding site in Addo, we only actually saw at most half a dozen of these red bishops, but among the yellows, browns and blacks of the far more abundant yellow weavers, the red bishop stood out to a frankly astonishing degree. Moving up the size chart just a little stands the grey heron, at up to 100 centimetres tall. In all candour, however, we must admit that most of that height is either neck or legs. While very striking in flight, the grey herons we saw in Addo tended to spend most of their time very close to the watering holes. Much like in the Kruger, the weather was unseasonably warm, so the herons took advantage of the shrinking watering holes to hunt more easily and regulate their own body temperature, which appears to include sitting in this very unusual pose. The next bird we encountered, and I would argue our crowning spot for Addo Elephant Park, was the blue crane. Despite only being about 20 centimetres taller than the grey heron, the blue crane actually weighs about 3 times as much. which might explain why, unlike the grey heron, they're not wading birds but are just terrestrial. Without a doubt, their most striking feature is their long wingtip feathers, which actually reach all the way to the ground. Or at least would have done if the breeze wasn't quite so strong. Finally, moving on to the avian predators, we start with a bird that had potentially travelled as far to get to South Africa as we had. Often seen the whole way across Europe, the common buzzard is, well, quite a common sight. Amazingly, some of these birds are known to have come from as far north as Finland, meaning their migration in a single season is as much as 13,000 kilometres, which is particularly impressive considering the majority of their diet is made up of small mammals weighing up to about 40 grams. Unlike the common buzzard, the pale chanting goshawk is resident in southern Africa, and the coloration differences between the adults and the juveniles is particularly striking. This subadult, for example, still has some of the juvenile features, notably the very pale eyebrows, for lack of a better word, which give the bird quite a belligerent cast. Pale chanting goshawks display a number of unusual feeding activities. They generally hunt solo and will take Cape hares, lizards, birds and insects, but they have also been observed taking tortoise hatchlings and consuming them whole while the shells are still soft. Much like the presence of the weavers, somehow it doesn't feel like a South African national park without the presence of at least one antelope. And kudu are one of the success stories of the Addo Elephant Park in particular. For a long time, the density of elephants in Addo was so high that they overgrazed and unfortunately outcompeted many smaller species, including the kudu, for food reserves. Although some kudu, like this young male who got its antlers stuck in a tree, weren't doing much to help matters themselves. Another abundant species within the park, although thankfully one that does not compete with the elephants for food reserves, is the zebra. Many of the zebra within the park have a paler rump coloration which is reminiscent of the now extinct quagga. But personally, my largest curiosity about the zebra in Addo Elephant Park is the subspecies that's actually present. From the geographic range of the species as a whole, one might expect the mountain zebra to be endemic to the region. However, this does not appear to be the case, and instead the species found throughout the park is the Burchell's or plains zebra. Regardless of which zebra subspecies is present in Addo Elephant Park, and indeed the reasons why, we were present during foaling season for the zebra. This meant a number of things for the people visiting the park and the other animals. First and foremost, of course, the males were, if you'll pardon the phrase, jockeying for position to prepare for the next mating season. It also meant there were a number of very young foals with, shall we say, very little road sense, and their hard-pressed mothers trying to protect them from the various predators in the park, and indeed from the cars of the visitors. Thankfully, most people in the park drove quite respectfully, but the new zebra mothers appeared to neither know nor care about this, and would stand in the road staring cars down until their foals were safely out of the way. The foals, for their part, didn't seem overly concerned about what was going on around them, largely being concerned with lazing away in the heat of the day and chasing one another extensively when the dusk cooled things off a little. As I mentioned earlier, Addo is home to a huge variety of species. On top of those we've already talked about are vervet monkeys, various species of tortoise, and the flightless dung beetle, which, fun fact, has right of way within the park to ensure that its limited species numbers remain protected. This individual wasn't having much luck handling its meal, and watching it fail repeatedly did cause a rare burst of unprofessionalism from me.
Oh no.